Confucius, or should we say Kongzhi? If you ask most Asian people about Confucius, you might get a confused look, but mention Kongzhi, and bam, they know exactly who you're talking about. Born as Kongqiu in 551 BCE, later known as Confucius, Master Kong, his name was Latinized to Confucius by Jesuit missionaries in the 16th century. Confucius developed his ideas during the chaotic spring and autumn period, 770 to 476 BCE, of the Eastern Zhou dynasty, and despite its peaceful-sounding name, it was a time rife with conflict and bloodshed. Rulers were desperately searching for ways to keep their kingdoms from crumbling. Enter Confucius, who swooped in with his silver rule: don't do to others what you don't want done to you. Noble? Sure. Groundbreaking? Debatable. But here's the thing. His philosophy and the objective of social and political harmony fit like a glove for rulers who wanted stability and order without having to lift a sword every 5 minutes. Confucius' ideas might have stayed niche, but along came the Han Dynasty, and Emperor Wu Di, 141 to 87 BCE, made Confucianism the official state ideology. He established the Imperial Academy in 124 BCE, where young men were trained in Confucian teachings and ethics to prepare for government service, and his philosophy became the blueprint for running a successful society. It worked wonders for those at the top, but for the rest, not so much. Confucius claimed to be humble, yet he essentially formalized the idea of a four-class social hierarchy. Scholars, sure, like him gotta be at the top, because of course. Meanwhile, farmers, artisans, and merchants were ranked lower. Not that being rich mattered much. Confucius made sure your virtue and knowledge defined your class. How convenient for a scholar. His philosophy gave educated men the self-assurance they craved. You may be broke, but hey, at least you're better than a merchant. Of course, rulers loved this know your place, never question authority philosophy because it kept the masses in check. Confucianism served the idea of harmony and balance for the rulers. But for those at the bottom, it meant inequality and oppression. Now, let's get to the part that really stings. Sure, Confucianism told rulers and commoners alike how to behave. Be faithful, practice rituals, follow social etiquette. Sounds reasonable, right? But the real impact was on everyday life, especially for women. Let's talk about filial piety, the idea that you owe your parents everything. This duty extended to women, but with an extra dose of strict gender roles. A woman's duty was to her husband, her family, and her household. Young women were expected to remain chaste, keep a pleasant demeanor, and remain pure virgins until marriage. Even worse, once married, women were not supposed to remarry, even if their husbands died. A woman's life was dictated by her parents, in-laws, and husband. No questions asked. This meant women were stuck in a system that basically said, stay in your lane, don't argue, and everything will be fine. Imagine this. You fall in love, but your parents disapprove. Forget about your hopes and dreams. Confucius says you need to serve your parents' wishes. And even if you marry someone you love, yay, your mother starts throwing shade at your significant other, claiming your wife isn't pleasing her enough. You're then obligated to educate your wife, or she's out. Confucius rules say she has to serve not just you but your entire family. And if she doesn't pop out a son, well, good luck. Your parents can boot her and bring in wife number 2. Thanks, Confucius. While Confucius preached about harmony and social order, his ideas had seriously problematic consequences, especially for women in leadership. In one example, Confucius commented on King Wu of Zhou, who claimed to have 10 skilled ministers. But Confucius, ever the stickler for hierarchy, dismissed one of these ministers entirely. Why? Because one was a woman. He famously said, with a woman among King Wu's ministers, there were in fact only 9 men. Some argue that Confucius was simply distinguishing between traditional gender roles, implying that women didn't typically engage in the external affairs required of ministers. Others interpret it as a direct statement that women were unfit for leadership. Whether Confucius was merely highlighting traditional roles or outright dismissing a woman's abilities, his view was clear. Women belonged in the domestic sphere and had no place in positions of political power. This belief would later shape centuries of Chinese society, where women were systematically excluded from governance and kept in subordinate roles, all in the name of social order. Now, to be fair, women's status in ancient China wasn't exactly great before Confucianism. But once his philosophy took root, gender roles became more deeply ingrained in society. Take the famous quote from Liu Bei in the epic Three Kingdoms. Brothers are like limbs, wives are like clothing. Torn clothing can be repaired. How can broken limbs be mended? This quote emphasizes the importance of male solidarity and clearly defines the lower status of women. Ironically, even the most powerful women couldn't escape the shadow of Confucianism. Wu Zetian, the first and only female emperor of China, was smart, powerful, and ruthless, but Confucius' philosophy was still breathing down her neck. In a brilliant move, she rolled out the imperial exam to recruit new talented men from the lower classes, ensuring their loyalty to her. Confucianism might have been against women in power, but by allowing lower-class men to rise up, she used it to her own benefit, a game changer for meritocracy, right? But what was at the core of that exam? Confucianism. Even on her last day, Wu Zetian had to bend to Confucian ideals to secure her place on the ancestor altar. Now, to be fair, Confucius did have one progressive rule: no marrying within your own clan. Though he didn't say it out loud, the message was clear. In the perspective of family, marriage can bring families of different surnames, different clans, together. That meant you had to look outside your own gene pool, which helped reduce the risk of genetic issues from inbreeding. Even today, while people with the same surname can now marry in China, you've still got to check that family tree to make sure you're not too closely related. Okay, Confucius, we'll give you that one. Confucianism has been told, taught, forced, and practiced for thousands of years, and its roots run deep in Asian society. It's so ingrained that newer generations might follow some of its teachings without even realizing it. And hey, if it's a good ethic, why would you mind? But the tricky part comes when you realize how much of Confucianism is baked into everyday life. So much so that people sometimes confuse it with a religion. Spoiler alert, it's not a religion. It's a philosophy, though its deep influence can blur the line between the two. Its tenets run so strong that they've shaped not just personal lives but entire governments and cultures.